This is Kalimantan, located in the Malay archipelago. It is known as the world's third largest island. This is a dangerous island. The terrain is rugged and perilous, covered with vast expanses of pristine jungle. Due to the tropical climate and an annual rainfall exceeding 4,000 millimeters, flash floods frequently occur here. Not only that, as one of the world's oldest primary forests, the creatures here are also exceptionally dangerous. Poisonous snakes and insects abound, and the challenge target for this episode of Primitive Living is precisely this wild and untamed jungle. The man is named Puma, an outdoor activities expert. Because he was once nearly trapped to death in the wild, he later devoted himself to studying the field of wilderness survival. His overall rating reaches 7.1. The woman is named Julie, a towering figure at 1.93 meters tall. She is a professional teacher in wilderness survival, capable of identifying animal species based on footprints. However, her overall rating is astonishingly low, only 5.5. This has set a new low. After having their clothes confiscated by the jeep, the two headed towards the gathering point. Walking along the path, Puma and Julie saw their teammates. They exchanged greetings, and the atmosphere between the two, meeting for the first time, was quite harmonious. After introductions, the two picked up the nearby bags and began to confirm their props. Julie brought a pot, while Puma brought a knife. Although a fire starter paired with a knife is the optimal combination, in the wilderness, the role of a pot cannot be overlooked. Therefore, if the two can successfully start a fire, with the help of this pot, they should be relatively more comfortable. Then they checked the map. The exit is located downstream of the river, while they are in the jungle on one side of the river. So they now need to cross the jungle first, and set up camp by the riverside. While ensuring their survival, they should look for the right moment to head to the exit. So after the challenge began, the two hurriedly walked towards the river. On the first day, they needed to reach the riverside and build a campsite, as the risk of spending the night in the jungle was too great. However, walking barefoot in the rainforest was indeed no easy feat. The two advanced slowly, one step deep, one step shallow. At this point, they finally realized what it meant for the terrain to be rugged and perilous. The slopes in the jungle were quite steep, and the ground was slippery. One could easily slide down from the steep slopes. The two were fully alert, and with Puma's help, although Julie was flustered by the rugged rainforest, nothing went wrong. Not long after they walked, Julie spotted wild boar footprints, which made them a bit worried. If wild boars were active near the campsite, it would not be a pleasant situation. Although Julie was tall and sturdy, her physical condition seemed not to be high. After only half a day of walking, she already felt dehydrated. This also worried Puma, because although he was a bit tired from the journey, he did not feel thirsty at all. But soon, they saw a large tree serving as a marker. After checking the map, they confirmed that the river was just ahead. The two rallied their spirits and continued forward, soon hearing the sound of flowing water. Around 4 p.m., they finally reached the river. Looking at the sky, they first decided to build a shelter. To stay away from poisonous snakes and scorpions, as well as large animals like wild boars, they chose a treehouse high off the ground. Between several sturdy trees, they erected a high frame. However, it was already quite late, and after a flurry of activity, they could only create a rudimentary structure, but at least they had a place to rest. However, at night, they actually encountered wild boars. Although it caused a commotion, the two, hiding on the high frame, did not have any encounters with the wild boars, but this incident scared them badly, and until the next day, they were still shaken. But with a new day beginning, the two also needed to prepare their next plan. First was to start a fire. They hadn't had time to do it yesterday, so they had to quickly build a fire, not only considering the fire's effect in repelling beasts, but they also had brought a pot, and they naturally did not dare to drink raw water. So as long as they had fire, they would have an endless supply of fresh water resources, and they would not have to worry about drinking water during this challenge. The second priority was to reinforce the campsite. After all, last night, their shelter was almost just a framework. Puma was in charge of daily living matters here. In the primitive rainforest, starting a fire by drilling wood was extremely difficult. Just finding sufficiently dry materials was a challenge. So, Puma struggled for most of the day without success. This frustrated him greatly. The loss of physical strength made him feel terrible. He even had the idea of drinking raw water directly. So Julie took on the task of starting a fire, and Puma went aside to rest. But the thought of drinking raw water lingered in his mind like a nightmare. Considering that they might need to live for a while longer, he found a secluded tributary and took a couple of sips. The mountain spring water tasted so good. Julie, on the other hand, worked diligently at the campsite all afternoon. The next day, their fire-starting plan failed. Time came to the third day. Julie was almost at her breaking point. She had always had a low physical constitution, and the prolonged lack of water intake made her look quite unwell. So Puma started thinking of other ways. Since Julie was unwilling to drink raw water no matter what, he planned to look for some underground tributaries. This groundwater, formed by soil filtration, was basically drinkable. Searching along the riverbank, Puma actually found some underground tributaries. Although there wasn't much water, it was like a lifesaver for Julie. After taking in some water, she felt like she had come back to life. Time slowly approached the 4th day. The two were still struggling with starting a fire, but today the sun was shining brightly, and the air was much drier. After a morning of effort, they finally got a few sparks. Then human civilization finally took a qualitative leap forward. They successfully lit a fire. This made the two quite emotional. This fire was the key to their survival. Life was hard, but ensuring the fire kept burning in the rainforest was even harder. Although they now had water to drink and their relationship was getting better, they still couldn't let their guard down. Time passed slowly as the two got along harmoniously. By the 6th day, they needed to figure out how to get some food. Julie made a net for catching fish, but could only catch some small crabs. Puma, on the other hand, even ate worms directly. Although it looked a bit miserable, it was like what Bear Grylls said, "This thing has 6 times the protein of beef." Now their lives were somewhat on track, steady with a touch of leisure, and even occasionally with small surprises. For example, today Julie actually found a turtle in her net. Wow, this was a feast. Julie was so happy that she almost jumped on the spot. After a flurry of activity, Julie successfully replenished her energy. Then she started to continue repairing their little treehouse, but it seemed that Julie had eaten the whole turtle by herself. Of course, whether she shared it with Puma or not, no one knew. But when this man came back, he discovered a piece of bad news. Their fire had gone out. There wasn't even a single spark in the pile of ashes. It seemed to have been out for quite a while. This sudden turn of events left both of them stunned. Julie even felt a bit resentful towards Puma because while she was busy, he was by the fire. But fire can be lit again. Teammates shouldn't fall out over this. Although that's what they thought, they couldn't help but be affected by the changing weather. Just as the fire went out, the sky darkened. Soon, it poured with rain, leaving Puma and Julie dumbfounded. This was the ultimate case of adding insult to injury. Starting a fire in the rainforest was already difficult, and with the rain washing everything away, it was almost impossible to start a fire now. Moreover, being soaked by the rain, their body temperatures kept dropping. Not only did they have no way to look for food, but they also had to constantly worry about hypothermia. This was probably what was meant by being cold and hungry, but the dangers didn't stop there. Because of the rain, the small stream they relied on for survival also rose significantly in water level, directly triggering a mountain flood. Their campsite was not far from the riverbank, and the violent mountain flood could threaten their lives at any moment. And it wasn't just that. The giant trees in the jungle also started to teeter precariously. By nightfall, amidst the thunderous and lightning-filled torrential rain, their body temperatures had dropped alarmingly low. They were now completely unable to ensure their own safety. Moreover, the thing they feared most had happened. Trees began to topple over. The most dangerous incident occurred when a fallen tree was only 3 or 4 meters away from them. If it had fallen a bit more and hit them, the consequences would have been unimaginable. Mountain floods, landslides, and countless falling trees surrounded them with danger. Throughout the entire night, Puma and Julie spent it in fear and trembling. By the 8th day, the torrential rain had ended. Although their shelter was destroyed by a falling tree at night, fortunately, neither of them was injured. This disaster left them disheartened. Under such an outburst from nature, no amount of survival experience could make a difference. However, since the weather had cleared up, they had to pull themselves together and continue to work hard. First, they needed to rebuild a shelter. But Puma's condition was not right. During the day, he felt weak all over. By night, this man collapsed. He felt cold all over, shivering constantly, and his body temperature kept rising. By the 9th day, Puma had completely collapsed. Julie was extremely worried. Her partner was burning up with fever, and even when lying down, Puma was constantly groaning. The production team, sensing that something was wrong, finally sent medical assistance to Puma. The medic measured Puma's temperature in the shed. Things had finally gotten out of control. Under these conditions, it was basically impossible to determine what exactly was causing Puma's high fever. It could be bacteria, or it could be cholera, typhoid fever, dengue fever, or even malaria. So, he had to withdraw from the challenge now. If any of these diseases were not treated promptly, the consequences would be very serious. Julie beside him burst into tears on the spot. She was worried not only for her partner who had worked together with her to survive for more than a week, but also desperate for the days ahead. She wasn't injured, so she wouldn't choose to withdraw. But in reality, surviving in the wild alone posed a tremendous psychological test. Although there would be cameramen from the production team during the day, at night, she would be alone sleeping in this dark, wild, primitive forest. Just thinking about it made her feel like she was about to collapse. Moreover, when Puma was taken away, his body temperature had risen to 40 degrees Celsius. After being sent to the hospital for treatment, it was finally discovered that Puma's illness was caused by that sip of sweet mountain spring water. That one sip had infected him with a rather terrifying bacterium. So not drinking raw water in the wild was truly a life-saving rule. Now, only Julie was left alone at the campsite. Although she reluctantly chose to continue the challenge, as the sun gradually disappeared and she was about to spend the night alone in this forest, the panic seeped into her bones. Fortunately, after Puma left, she lit a fire right away. Although she didn't have to worry about water anymore, she now had to do all the work alone and search for food everywhere. She wasn't getting enough nourishment to begin with, and this constant busyness left her mentally and physically exhausted. As time passed in this hardship, Julie was on the verge of collapse. She could hardly find anything to eat. This rainforest had dealt her a heavy blow. Her teammate had been knocked down, and she couldn't find suitable food either. She could only barely survive day by day. Being alone, she couldn't take care of everything. So when Julie came back after being busy outside, she found that the fire had gone out again. Without fire, water, or food, Julie was overwhelmed by negative emotions. She felt she couldn't hold on anymore. All sorts of wild thoughts and panic made her restless. The difficulty of this challenge far exceeded her expectations. Finally, Julie's body and mind reached their limits. On the 18th day, she limped back along the path she had come. Due to the depression and anxiety from losing her teammate, Julie also announced her withdrawal from their primitive life. The 21-day challenge failed. They were the first pair to fail the challenge in the first season, falling in the tropical rainforest. It had to be said that the rainforest was indeed an extremely difficult map, not to mention when a teammate recklessly drank raw water. To persist alone, one first had to be mentally strong enough, and Julie had failed due to anxiety. As for Puma, after receiving emergency treatment, he was out of danger. However, the failure of the challenge also lowered their ratings accordingly. Puma's rating dropped from 7.4 to 6.1, and Julie's dropped from 5.5 to 5. The two left this place in a disheveled manner and returned to their own lives. Located in the southern part of the United States, Louisiana boasts more than half of the wetlands in this region. Here, there are over 1 million alligators, 6 kinds of ferocious and deadly venomous snakes that strike fear into people's hearts, as well as countless terrifying venomous insects. Coupled with prolonged storms and heavy rain, vast tracts of dry land have been swallowed up by storm surges. Unbearable dampness, and omnipresent dangers define this episode's primitive survival challenge location. The male challenger is named Billy, an avid outdoor survival enthusiast, who is skilled at crafting and wielding primitive weapons, with a comprehensive rating of 8.1, a real super hunk. The other female challenger is Kai, a stunt performer, who is also quite obsessed with wilderness survival activities, with a rating of 6.3. The two were taken by boat to a swamp. After undressing, they soon realized something was amiss. The temperature here might have a huge impact on them, but since they had come, they slowly made their way to the gathering spot. After some greetings and introductions, they found their backpacks containing their initial gear. Kai brought a lighter, while Billy brought a knife. The best combination, no need to elaborate. Then they looked at the map. Starting from their gathering point, they needed to identify directions, traverse through the jungle and swamp, and reach a high ground in the distance to set up camp. Then they had to survive, and find the right time to reach the exit located in the deep water area. However, this deep water area was the territory of alligators. Their task was practically hellish in difficulty, but they had no time to dawdle. After identifying the direction, they set off without delay. They hadn't walked far, when the bone-chilling swamp water made them suffer. Moreover, Billy's biggest concern wasn't this. When temperature-regulating humans enter the swamp, they are like 2 giant pink meatballs. All predators here would see them as easy prey. With countless alligators and venomous snakes, it was fraught with danger. Sure enough, they hadn't walked far when they saw an alligator calling for its mate. They could only tiptoe away slowly. As they walked, a new problem arose. It was easy to get lost in such a place. Even though Billy was quite reliable, after walking for a while, he realized they had been going in circles. But fortunately, relying on the sun overhead, Billy and Kai successfully reached the designated high ground. However, compared to other places, resources here were extremely scarce. While building their shelter, they pondered what resources they could utilize here. But to their surprise, When Kai went to look for fan palms, she actually found a pot. Wow, what luck! It was equivalent to 3 initial knives. And it wasn't just Kai who was incredibly lucky. Billy, after all, was an 8.1 rated hunk. When he saw a snake, he said he was scared, but his body was honest as he charged forward and caught it with his bare hands. Although he was bitten, he was quite certain it wasn't a venomous snake. But Kai was terrified. Nevertheless, they got their first meal. No wonder he was an 8-point expert. His strength was truly terrifying. Then the two successfully built a fire and cooked the snake, enjoying a delicious meal on the first day. Then at night, low temperatures and mosquitoes began to wreak havoc, torturing them miserably. The next morning, the two decided to build a better shelter first. Not only was the low temperature a problem, if they continued to be tortured by mosquitoes like last night, they would eventually collapse without enough rest. So after some discussion, they started looking for various plants to make a bed and block the wind. But soon, Kai, who was searching for materials, ran into trouble. A highly venomous and fierce snake appeared beneath her feet. She immediately started calling for help. Upon hearing that his companion was in trouble, Billy immediately improvised, whittling a spear, and then angrily went to deal with the snake. Of course, the main reason was that the snake was edible. Looking at the wood thrust in its face, the snake opened its mouth wide in a threat display, only to be instantly struck on the head by Billy's swift and accurate blow. This fierce snake met its end right there. Kai beside him turned into a little fangirl, completely mesmerized by this expert's snake-killing technique. But snakes are the last thing this place lacks. Not long after, Kai saw another one. Then Billy started running over excitedly to continue catching snakes. But as he caught more and more, Billy began to feel a sense of fear. How could there be so many snakes here? Almost every few steps, one could see a snake by the swamp or in the bushes. Billy was going berserk with killing snakes, chasing them directly into the swamp with red eyes. But in fact, he couldn't kill all the snakes here. Even with his overwhelming ferocity, he might scare away the snakes on this side, but new ones would soon appear on the other side. To prevent these snakes from sneaking into their campsite, Billy tirelessly ran around catching snakes everywhere, not only for safety, but also for food. He even directly grabbed them with his hands. Once he confirmed they were non-venomous, not sparing even those lazily basking in the sun. Kai beside him was stunned. She realized she had encountered a real expert. The second day ended with the two happily catching snakes everywhere. Time came to the 4th day. Although it was still sunny, the clouds were moving quite fast. It seemed that the weather was about to change, but the two still continued to repair their shelter step by step. Although the progress was slow due to the abundance of snakes, Billy still steadily continued to search for materials, even regretting that he hadn't caught the moccasin snake he had just encountered. But in fact, Billy's emotions were also fluctuating. After all, this place was extremely dangerous. No one could remain absolutely calm in an environment surrounded by crises. At dawn on the 5th day, the worst situation occurred. A sudden heavy rainstorm accompanied by strong winds hit their campsite. The plummeting temperature not only affected their bodies, but under the torrential rain, the fire also almost went out. By 5 or 6 in the morning, the two had fallen into absolute crisis. Since the hand-built grass shed was basically not waterproof, their campsite was now flooded, and the fire had completely gone out. Their body temperatures kept dropping, and under the soaking rain, their hands and feet had begun to slowly stiffen. Fortunately, they managed to endure this nightmare-like night by gritting their teeth. After daybreak in the morning, the rain had stopped, but the rare high ground in this swamp was completely submerged, with water accumulating on the ground reaching a depth of 20 to 30 centimeters. This made Billy very frustrated. They had lost everything, or even worse, so now they needed to start from scratch, finding a suitable place to set up camp again, and then lighting a fire. However, in a place surrounded by shoals everywhere, it was difficult even to build a platform above the water surface. Moreover, having just been soaked in the rain, starting a fire was also a problem. Fortunately, Kai had an expert by her side. Using thick logs as the base, they built a platform above the water surface. Then Billy used the shavings scraped off to successfully light a fire. Under the circumstances where everything had been washed away, they actually managed to turn the situation around. One had to say, he truly deserved to be an expert with an 8-point rating. But after soaking in the stagnant swamp water for so long, even Billy couldn't hold on anymore. His feet were having problems. The prolonged soaking made his feet extremely painful, and the softened skin was easily invaded by foreign objects, and then infected. This made Billy very worried. They could no longer continue to move around in the stagnant water, so the two stayed at the campsite and began to think about their next move. Although the snakes were almost impossible to find after the heavy rain, Billy noticed that There were still quite a few crayfish in this swamp, but he hadn't caught any yet. The prolonged lack of food made this snake-killing expert a bit listless. He watched as birds around him casually picked up crayfish, as if shopping in a supermarket, and he couldn't help but feel envious. So the two tough guys came up with an idea. They used their feet as bait to attract aquatic organisms, and then used these aquatic organisms as bait to fish for crayfish. One had to say, these two were really tough on themselves. However, on the 8th day, the bait they had obtained with their bodies didn't work. The crayfish traps were empty. Billy, who was starving, couldn't hold on anymore. His mental state worried Kai greatly. Time came to the 10th day. Hungry and enduring foot pain, searched for firewood everywhere. Due to the prolonged lack of energy intake, their conditions were not optimistic. But as long as they could still move, they wouldn't give up. On the 13th day, Billy couldn't take it anymore. After observing the direction of the water flow, he judged that there should be a higher place upstream. But Kai didn't agree, because Billy hadn't left the campsite platform for 4 days. She doubted whether Billy had enough physical strength to search for a new campsite. The two had a difference of opinion, but as Billy had said, the result of them staying here now would be a failed challenge. Moreover, the two were a team. So after some negotiation, they decided to set off the next day to search for a new campsite. Soon, the 14th day arrived. The two slowly walked in another direction. This migration could be described as desperate. They were now nearly exhausted, and they also had to be on guard against the dangerous creatures lurking around. They encountered quite a few snakes along the way, and after walking for most of the day, no sign of land appeared. This made Billy quite frustrated. He felt he had made a wrong choice, but the next second, Kai let out a surprised cry. Because she saw land, they had succeeded. Green grass, trees, and soil came into view, and Billy finally breathed a sigh of relief. This was a rather perfect place, with a dry environment, and palm trees all around, an extremely suitable place for camping. The two lit a fire, and after resting for a night, on the 15th day, they started building a shelter again. But the two, who hadn't eaten, were almost at their wits' end. They urgently needed to replenish their energy. Time came to the 17th day. Due to hunger, Billy, the main damage dealer in the team, was almost done for. However, Kai turned out to be a very qualified healer, constantly encouraging her companion. With Kai's blessing of courage, the two mustered all their strength to craft weapons, and then began to search for prey everywhere. Over this period of time, Kai had always relied on her keen observation to provide help to Billy, and this time was no exception. She found footprints that could be called dinner. After Billy explored a bit, he set his sights on a tree hole, and then went in head-on. He soon caught this poor small rodent. This meal of meat replenished their energy, and helped them get through the immediate crisis, and life here gradually got better. On the 20th day, they began to plan their journey to the exit. This was the last challenge they had to face, because they would be approaching the alligators' territory, so they had to be on guard not only against snakes. The final day finally arrived. The two began to move towards the exit. However, after changing their campsite once, they were actually unsure of the exit's location now. That deep water area full of alligators required them to be extremely vigilant. When the two slowly approached the edge of the deep water area, they began to encounter alligators. These hunters usually hunted in deep water and moved quickly. In this waist-deep water area, if they were targeted, it would almost be a desperate situation. So in order not to alarm these bullies, they could only move slowly and stealthily. But fortunately, the production team didn't make things difficult for them. The two waited for a while at the edge of the deep water area, and then a helicopter arrived. Under the intense commotion, the alligators were also scared away. The two took this opportunity and happily climbed onto the helicopter. This also indicated that their challenge was a success. With only one initial item and nothing else, the two worked together to conquer this terrifying swamp. This was also the most harmonious and complementary team in several episodes. Billy, as the main damage dealer, was truly a big shot. If it weren't for the heavy rain, they could have easily survived just by catching snakes. And Kai, as the keen observer in the team, not only had a pair of sharp eyes, but also took care of Billy's psychology like a caring older sister. It could be said that in the most difficult swamp map, the two successfully survived for 21 days and completed the challenge. Billy's overall rating also increased from 8.1 to 8.9, while Kai's increased from 6.3 to 7.7.